Folks, good afternoon. My name is Dustin Siggins with Proven Media Solutions. And this week on Cracking the Comms Code, I actually have a couple of teammates of mine. Jasper has been published on both sides and worked in PR on both sides of the Atlantic. And Drew has edited everything from blogs to books. And what we're going to talk about today is the AI. What's the phrase, Jasper? Slopocalypse?
The Slopocalypse.
The Slopocalypse. And frankly, how PR firms can own this space, how content creators can own this space rather than being afraid of it. Because frankly, the more garbage that's out there, the better quality content will be appreciated and actually land where we need it to land. So Jasper and Drew, if you could just lay out a little bit, kind of what you do with us, what you've done in the past, and your positioning on sort of the AI slop in 2026.
Okay, well, hello, I'm Jasper Hamill. I am a journalist originally by trade, Jasper the journalist, and now I've gone into the what we call go to the dark side as a sort of copywriter, content editor, and PR consultant. So I've been a technology journalist a long time. I still write about technology, and I'm now using my skills for commercial purposes. And so I've been writing about AI for a very long time. And I saw almost overnight, as soon as ChatGPT launched, almost overnight, you saw content writers getting fired. You saw people who were hitherto silent on social media filling their feeds with this generic slop, it came to be called, which was produced by AI. Immediately overnight, it became predicted that this is it, this is the end. We're never going to pay writers anymore. Human creativity has been automated. You know, it was the muscle that was automated back in the Industrial Revolution. It's your brain now. You're doomed. But increasingly, as time went on, it became clear that the slopocalypse, as it's called, is not actually going to replace skilled human writers at the very least. It's going to replace unskilled human writers, but skilled human writers have nothing to fear. And in fact, this poses a kind of exciting challenge, I think, which is how do you stand out in an incredibly noisy, busy environment, which is something that, you know, journalists, particularly tabloid journalists, such as I have been and continue to identify as, are going to gives us a unique opportunity to tell the stories that stand out and stand above the slopocalypse. So I guess I'm slightly nervous about the future. I'm feeding my children and having a sustainable career. But I'm also excited at competing against the machine and seeing who wins.
As for me, I'm Drew Belsky, and my editing career started with editing, which is maybe a little bit unconventional because they always say you have to be a good writer in order to edit. I'm an okay writer, but I always enjoyed better making other people's writing better than it was. So I don't really know how much to add to what Jasper said. He's right, except that at least for me, I'm not super old yet, and I started my career in, technological media. The computer is way before me, and most of the editing work that I have done has been on a word processor or on a blog. And I will say, eventually, I got to do a sort of I don't know, dance backwards. And I was able to actually hold a book that I had helped to edit that had actual pages and actual ink that I could look at. And I know it makes me sound like an old man to say it, but that was a nice feeling. So I'm not so sure that we can unthinkingly march forward into the future of robots doing everything instead of people any more than we can expect every single person on Earth eventually to despise print media just because every single headline you read all the time, even the ones in newspapers sometimes, are complaining that print is dead.
And everyone, I just shared a piece in the comments below this conversation 2 years ago. Drew, who at the time was our mercenary op-ed editor, and we've dragged him more into the company where now he's doing a lot of writing and editing for us. He and Jasper run our content side of the operations. Um, Drew wrote a piece about how the human touch will always be necessary for editing, especially at this time when there's still so many mistakes being made by AI systems. Um, One of the things that has been interesting in the AI slop apocalypse, I'm going to repeat that and mangle it over and over again until Jasper, with his very smart sounding British accent, corrects me enough times. But I remember being concerned. You know, a lot, 80% of what we do on any given year is writing and placing op-eds. And I was very concerned that we were going to be out of a job really, really fast. And what I observed was that a lot of the writing was seemed to be getting worse because, as Jasper said, so many people got let go because people thought AI could replace the human writer. And what we've learned both through internal experimentation as well as through, frankly, competing in the marketplace is having a human trained on the front end, the middle of the process, and on the end, as PR practitioners, as a PR firm, really accelerates the quality of the writing that AI can do, whether you use AI or not. Certainly, AI can speed up what you're doing, just like a factory can, but without the right processes at a factory, you have a garbage product anyway. And that's a lot of what's happening. So I do think that the downside of the AI era is you have a lot of stuff out there, a lot of content. So the great stuff may actually get missed by people because they're just being on, there's an onslaught of content. But the quality content, I think, will still continue to be appreciated by human beings, especially if they're targeted to niche communities. So Jasper, I wanted you to jump in and kind of look at the advantages you're seeing from the tabloid side, how that carried forward, and then Drew, what you're seeing in the AI patterns that need to be edited because everyone's looking for that AI to see if, a human actually touched it.
So many years I bumped into another journalist called Jasper at the pub, which is the first time I'd met a human being called Jasper, because when I was young, the only people you met called Jasper were dogs. So I met Jasper the journalist, and I was working at one of the leading British tabloids at the time as the science and technology editor, reaching gazillions of readers. And he told me, your profession is going out the window. It'll be people like me, the quality press, the broadsheet press, or the business press that will survive. And I didn't much like Jasper, the other journalist, to be honest, the imposter journalist from the other side of London. He was from the West and I'm from the East, so that's a bit of rivalry there. And I didn't think I thought he was right at the time because he said with such confidence. But actually, as times move on, I'm starting to see that the real thing that AI can't do is the kind of human side of writing, is the human side of particularly storytelling. And it can't do something which is sensational, attention grabbing, and human first. So I use AI every day of my life, and I still do journalism. In fact, I write about AI almost every day of my life. And I use it to dig through reports, for instance, trying to pick a good line that I can write in my sensational tabloid tone. It just can't do it. It just can't do it. Whereas what it can do is produce kind of very generic your B2B content. Not all of it, but at a low level. So actually, what I'm quietly confident that the slightly more human, I hesitate to use the word grubby in this context because we don't do anything grubby in the PR game, but certainly in the tabloid journalism game, there is a little bit of grubbiness, and it can't do that. I used to think that one of the ways to bypass the slopocalypse is to be sort of shocking and unbrand safe, to do stuff that AI wouldn't do because it's not allowed unless it's Elon Musk's Grok, for instance. But OpenAI is not going to let its model misbehave. It's very locked down. It's very well behaved. But actually, I see that human aspect of storytelling, of content production, is becoming more and more important. Obviously, that's something we do a lot at Proven, is telling ordinary people's stories, which is a great privilege, really, and something I just don't think AI can do compellingly. It doesn't seem able to put the most interesting bit at the top, leave a little bit out so you continue reading, and then wrap things up conclusively. And I don't see that improving. It has got better, but I don't see it ever really replacing the human heart and soul. And as for sort of real writers like poets or whatever, I don't think AI has got a chance of being the next, T.S. Eliot or Walter Whitman, if I can refer to my new adopted American home. I don't think it's got a chance, really, to be honest. So that human aspect remains important.
Sure. What are you seeing on the editing side? We had a piece recently that we all worked on where it was the number of AI, let's just say style of content was so obvious that we had to edit the living heck out of the thing. Can you explain some of the trends that you've seen from as an editor, from your editing perch at your different media homes, to explain to people what you're seeing and what that why that needs to be edited so heavily rather than just get it out the door for speed?
Yeah, sure. Again, Jasper's offering excellent commentary on sort of the 10,000 foot view of the competition between robot writers and human writers. And at least based on the trajectory of my career and what I'm good at, I'm kind of looking at the same issue through the opposite end of the binoculars, where rather than thinking about the big concepts, I'm reading content sort of from the same genre, the same kind of writers every day, over and over again. And granted, not everybody does this. Lay people certainly don't do it. But at least for the professionals like us, you start to see the same thing over and over again. You know, from people who at least claim to be different, you're finding the same patterns of grammar. You're finding the same vocabulary. You're finding the same just like way of making a point. And once you've read it 50 times in a row, it's not really landing as well. As a concrete example, there was a lot of discussion earlier on when AI was starting to write more and more content about how many M dashes it uses. Everybody was real upset, too many M dashes in AI. I'm not seeing that so much anymore, but I am starting to see different things and maybe more subtle things. But as you go through, for example, a political publication, and you read lots of opinions about a certain bill that needs to pass or a certain foreign policy that somebody would like to adopt, you'll see a formula of, I mean, the example that comes off the top of my head is this policy is turns competence into capitulation, right? How snappy. It's two nouns that both begin with C. They both have the hard sound, and that seems really, really good. But then you remember that you have read that formula over and over again, even in the same article, and maybe two or three times in the same paragraph. And people are letting that get by because AI is supposed to replace the human touch, as Jasper said. This is part of why I'm confident that that's not going to happen. Now, the one thing I'll say as the devil's advocate is after Jasper's excellent comments, I could say, well, you know what? It's fine. We'll eventually have a good enough AI, and I'll just tell it, write me a poem in the style of T.S. Eliot, but a little bit more modern than him so that we can have the next generation of poets. But I think it's really a simplistic retort. We'll always, you know, we'll get a better one 5 minutes from now, in part because, well, what's the best analogy I can use? You know, you don't really have Bonnie and Clyde robbing banks anymore, right? And yet, just because Bonnie and Clyde went down in a horrible firefight with the police, it doesn't mean that nobody robs banks anymore or nobody steals anything anymore. So the bank robbers and the people who are trying to stop bank robbing are in a competition all the time. And this goes back to what you said before. No matter how good the AI gets, eventually people are going to notice where it's slipping up. First, the editors will notice it, but then the general public will start to notice it too. And people will start accounting for that and wanting something better than that. So all the editors who are in their offices getting content every single day from all manner of different PR firms, they're going to look for the one that doesn't look like the AI. And so part of our job, I think, going forward is going to be to anticipate that. And one of the ways that we excel, I dare say, is that we don't have to anticipate it so much because we're already doing things well.
Can I expand upon your Bonnie and Clyde point, which I thought was brilliant? Bank robbery really has changed. It's significantly less glamorous. You know, it's now someone sitting alone in their room, perhaps in, you know, cybercrime hotspot, perhaps Russia. Um, and I think that's an accurate assessment. And it's someone sitting alone in their room and they're taking a lot of money and it's less glamorous. And that's actually my fear a little bit for writing, to be honest, that it becomes that we choke out the kind of the romantic image of the writer, you know, someone who doesn't really turn in a lot of copy, like the star reporter that only writes something once a week, but it's brilliant, that we chase them out and we try to make the humans like the machines and the kind of glamour goes out of writing. And I think the sort of the anti-Bonnie and Clydification of writing is a genuine threat because I think we should have a bit of romance about us, you know, and a bit of creative chaos in ways that are brand safe and acceptable, obviously.
Um, so actually, you both kind of anticipated Rod Hughes's question here. And by the way, for anyone watching, please do ask questions. Carrie's comment: copy editing is best done by a human. Absolutely. But Rod Hughes has a comment and a question. Agreed that AI is a poor writer today. As AI improves and humans get better at prompts, do you feel that the lack of AI writing quality will diminish? And I'm gonna again push back and play devil's advocate here, where the idea that a robot could take over factory work was probably seen as impossible, and then it did it. And now fewer humans are needed to run factories. AI or robots can now load things, unload things. They can allegedly drive cars. I haven't looked into that, but I guess that's what's going on
Mhm.
now. Will the systems get better, smarter, and faster? One, do you think they will accelerate that because of how quickly technology moves? And then two, Drew, you said earlier, and we are in PR, so we're earned in media, but as the barriers to entry are so minimal online to reach audiences through newsletters, social media, etc. Do you think audiences are actually going to have the mental capability to still see the quality when they're just bombarded with ads and newsletters and emails and billboards and other content?
I think there are two answers to that question. The first one is yes, of course, with every form of technology, people get better at using it. And in some ways, the product, whatever it is, improves. When the guys were chiseling their writing onto a stone tablet, that was a pain. And then the pen came along, and the guy who was dexterous enough to use the pen well was able to write better books. I know that's kind of a dumb, simplistic analogy, but you understand what I'm saying. So
Mhm.
yes, people will get better at prompts for AI, and the AI will get better, or at least be better programmed to understand them. And so you'll have more polished products. But the second part of my answer is you have to ask yourself, what kind of product do I want? One of the things that I really fear in the age of AI is not so much that every single copywriter and editor is going to get fired, but rather that the kind of product people are starting to expect will change. And so as we get really good at these prompts, and as the AIs get really good at processing them, there's going to be a certain type of content that maybe will be really appealing to even a wide segment of the market. You maybe could do an analogy to music, where we don't see so much classical music anymore. Not so much because it's bad or because it's super unpopular, but because it's hard. And it's hard for a robot to synthesize that. Whereas if you look at pop music, you can say this song is by Britney Spears or Taylor Swift, or not to slander anybody who actually does write her own music. But at the end of the day, you can look at who's behind that song, and it's a whole crowd of people who maybe have written a little bit of it or put some chords together, and that will probably turn into a robot soon if it hasn't already. And it's very popular. So you're going to have this stratification that already exists, I think, between, well, not even between, but there will be levels of consumers. And so a certain firm might say, I want to reach the consumer who's content with that low level of content that a robot can churn out. And maybe they'll be very good at it. They could be the McDonald's of PR, right? But there's also going to be a high level consumer. There always will be. Even, from a kind of cynical perspective, you are always going to have a crowd of people either who are the smartest or want to look the smartest. And they're especially going to want content that rises above what AI can produce. So you'll end up with a kind of do what you need to get by product, and it'll be very easy, it'll be very quick, and people who are putting that out will find many other uses for their time. But you're also going to have, for lack of a better word, a kind of bespoke product that still will be very popular, not just for the elite, the aspiring elite, but also for everybody else who sees that and themselves aspires to it too.
Absolutely. And I think that sort of bifurcation is actually really, really dangerous because if you have an elite who reads The Economist and pays to read The Economist and everyone else reads the pap turned out by AI, I mean, that really is a depressing kind of stratification of the knowledge ecosystem. So a few years ago, journalists were talking about something called the attention recession, which is the kind of the glory days of digital journalism, if you can call them the glory days. 7 reasons why the BuzzFeed era wasn't all that interesting. I guess it was the BuzzFeed era, really, when there was this brand new way of reaching an audience, and there were massive audiences, huge new kind of innovations in style. Where that's the genesis of the listicle and all these other kind of now ubiquitous ways of communicating. But the attention recession came not long afterwards, and you saw a lot of digital journalists getting laid off. And I think there's a genuine risk that we will just become completely exhausted from the wider kind of open internet, where we discover new kinds of content and we discover new kinds of voices that we wouldn't otherwise hear, and we'll retreat into our kind of information silos. This was warned about as well back in the BuzzFeed era, whereas you don't need to go out and find new things; it's all just brought to you. So you sit in your bunker in your silo with your AI, and it tells you what you want to hear. One of the great aspects of reading a newspaper is actually the discovery of stuff that you wouldn't necessarily be interested. I remember sitting with the Sunday papers in the past and reading the style section, and anyone who's met me knows that I'm not particularly stylish and don't really care that much about that stuff. But I knew all about it. I knew all about the latest style trends in New York and London. And I would read them just because it was there. Or you turn to page 6 and there was something on page 7 that you wouldn't otherwise read. But that content discovery, that very natural content discovery mechanism has gone out the window now. Now it's if you like this, you'll also like this, more of what you like. And I think the one of the risks is that it becomes harder and harder for kind of original voices to break through as we're just continually fed what it is we're already interested in. And we might not even need to go out and seek journalism. We say you're interested in, you have a niche interest, music, synthesizers, something like that. You could just, AI will tell you all you need to know. And outside of breaking new stories, which is kind of the primary function of a journalist, the more sort of information conveying aspect of communications and journalism, I think definitely might become less important. I think that's kind of a big worry.
One thing I'll add to answer the question is I think it's very rare when there's an improvement in a product that it's just the product is better. When you start coming up with new processes to make a product better, you are almost inevitably always also going to make it different. And so that's not really a value judgment one way or another when we apply this to AI, but rather an admonition that we should be careful as we use this new technology about what sort of different we want our products to be as they are improving. And even to go so far as to ask ourselves, is the product even really improving?
The I lost my train of thought. One of the things that's been crossing my mind in the last week or two is will the advent of AI, how much will that impact consumer thinking and consumer choices? We're in a sort of buy America phase of our country, not your country, Jasper, but your adopted country. How many adopted countries do you have now, Jasper?
Many. I've worked all over the world. Yeah. I'm big in Portugal. You wouldn't know, but I'm actually quite popular in Portugal. Portugal and the USA.
Uh, Interesting. Well, we'll have a question related to that soon. So I do wonder, as people look and say, was this AI? Will they go back to their local news a bit more? Will they look and say, I don't trust that alleged national voice that I don't even know if they exist or not because they could just be AI. I'm going to trust that local voice, that local community leader, that neighbor of mine. I can actually verify that they exist as a real human being trying to impact my community, policy, the local business community, etc. So that's the sort of a hypothesis that's been floating in my brain the last week. But second, I do want to put a plug in for what we do at Proven Media because one of the ways that we try to stand out is not on data, because everyone has access to data. It is on quality, of course, but a huge part of what we do is interviewing everyday people. My LinkedIn post today was on how we've gotten 8 op-eds by really average people for the most part into USA Today, plus several on the Hill, Work Their Politics, Fox News, because we rely heavily on interviews with these people. Everyone else can be put on these data heavy political phraseologies, all this very technical stuff. And we are dialing into human voices with real stories that are tailored to the local and regional state communities. And I think that is going to continue to be an advantage of the human because we can do those interviews and we tailor it locally. I do wonder if, I get back to my original statement, if that will also create more impact because I can trust that that person actually exists versus an AI agent that was just made up yesterday. I think that could be very impactful for the PR world is getting those stories.
I think that's undoubtedly true. You're seeing it in all aspects of life, not just your neighbor, But in the business world, in business journalism, you're seeing the rise of kind of independent influencers who are seen as trusted voices in that space. And it's less that they're promoting a publication that so much as they're promoting themselves. And people feel they have a personal relationship. I think that's undoubtedly true. Certainly, I guess the rise of YouTube was a kind of hint of that. Once upon a time, it was considered pretty eccentric to sit in your room by yourself and talk to camera. And now, of course, we're
Sure.
sort of used to it. I
I'm
think
doing that
that's,
right now. I'm literally in a room talking to a camera right now. Sorry,
I know
keep
it's
going.
bizarre. If you could come from the Stone Age, you'd think, who are these people talking to this big glowing cube? It's just bizarre, isn't it? But and I think that will become increasingly important, actually. Trusted voices, verified voices. I expect, to be honest, we're going to have to verify our identity much, much more on the internet going forward, especially as agentic AI rolls out and you have bots. There's all sorts of ideas on how to do this, from, small micro payments every time you interact with a piece of content to prove you're not a bot, to, cryptographic keys being exchanged, or whatever. I imagine proving our humanity is going to become more important on an individual consumer level, all across the internet. And I imagine we'll want our people we follow, the people we trust, to prove their humanity to us, either through any number of means. So absolutely, I think this is going to be the golden age of the trusted influencer, whether that's a kind of community figure, whether, at a state level, or it's someone in a particular vertical that's done their dues, or it's a trusted journalist. The problem is, I guess, is that's very hard to break into. One of the problems with the YouTube ecosystem, for instance, is if you want to become a fan of a new content creator, you have to stop following another one. Because they produce so much content. So it's a very competitive world, and it's very hard to break through. And I just hope we can get a mechanism whereby we don't become too fixed, and at the same time we don't become too ephemeral, because there's a chance, I don't know if you're on TikTok. I'm a TikTok fiend, but you'll see someone and they'll be massive on TikTok for 3 months. You'll see their entire life played out and it's brilliant, and boom, they're gone. It's the Andy Warhol 15 minutes of fame. It's probably more like 15 weeks of fame, actually. So Andy Warhol was slightly wrong on the time scale, but he was right on the point, as he's right on so many things. So yeah, yes is the answer to that. Trusted voices are more important than ever, and certainly that's something that's great fun to do for Proven Media Solutions, is kind of narrate the stories of these trusted voices. But I also think it's so important for communicating really important issues in a way that's going to stick in people's mind, influence them, and make them think.
Yeah, Jasper mentioned that we're approaching maybe a golden age of local media. I would say we're already fairly deep in whatever the opposite of a golden age is regarding suspicion in communication. I still get regular emails from some friend who has not contacted me in 2 years saying, let's catch up. And when I see that email, I delete it, or I make it spam, because it's probably some kind of scam from somebody who sold his identity. So that's going to happen more and more, where if you cannot see the person speaking to you to your face, you have to wonder, is this person real? With all the ramifications that we just discussed, I think authenticity is going to become a very hot commodity going forward, even hotter than it's been. And so one of the things that Proven Media does well is actually talk to human beings, right? I worry that as this technology gets more and more advanced and it becomes easier and easier for us to communicate from very far away, uh, a lot of players in this game will not be very good at talking to human beings anymore and asking them questions in an interview that will reveal the human side of what we're trying to express. That's one way that we obviously rise above the competition, and I wonder how much competition there will be as these programs and modules make it so easy to put content out and make it so tempting for the people who have them to find something else to do.
Yeah, so actually a discussion I had with Blair Huddy a few months back was, will AI basically kill critical thinking? And there's parallels to social media on this. I mean, I could tell, I realized that about 3 years ago. I'm 40, so social media came out when I was my second year of college. First year of college was when Facebook replaced MySpace and began to expand the social media world. I actually had to admit it 3 years ago. My ability to read something longer than 1,500 words, beyond a book that I know I'm going to be interested in, had diminished. partly because of social media, partly because I've spent a career in 650 to 900 word writing, admittedly. But my ability to read that long form had diminished. It became a bit of a challenge for me to make myself do it. Similarly, I think there is a risk to your point, Drew, about AI, but the piece I wrote for PR Week was AI won't kill PR. Lazy leaders might. And I think it's going to be a matter of the more senior members of the PR industry, say 35 and over, who have lived pre-AI to make sure that they train the next generation. I suspect the PR industry will shrink in the next decade. But I think there's a fine line. I'll get to a question from Kane in just a moment. I think there's a fine line between being the horseshoe maker in the era of the car and being a horseshoe maker at the Kentucky Derby. And I think that by continuing to elevate the human experience, whether it's through the tabloid journalism, interviews, excellent copy editing, all those components, as well as great pitching to media outlets, I think the PR world, whether it gets smaller, bigger, or stays the same because of LLMs liking the outcome of PR, media coverage, I think that we are going to have to remember that we are not the horseshoe maker in the era, or seek to not be the horseshoe maker in the era of the car, but the horseshoe maker at the Kentucky Derby, where we are speaking to that elevated reader who's then going to impact people who are fine with McDonald's slop, was my suspicion at least. I hope that wasn't an MBA word salad. I hadn't fully thought that through until I was speaking there. So Kane Fulton asked a question here. What are your thoughts on Belgium-based news publisher I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Media Huis? This is the first I'm seeing it, automating the creation of news writing using AI agents. The proposal is to free up its 2,000 journalists to concentrate on signature journalism, billed as focusing on knocking on doors and interviewing communities. I think it actually ties into what we've all been saying here. Whereas use AI to get sort of the general stuff, but the high end stuff is still going to come from humans. In this case, knocking on doors. Jasper, I had not heard of this outlet
Mm.
doing this. Had you seen it?
I have seen that, as a connoisseur of Belgian news, as I am. I had actually seen this, and actually, the initial reaction is, how dare you? Of course, writing is a very important part of reporting. Some of the best reporters I've ever worked with were not actually great writers. They were hammered into place by what we call sub-editors, hammered out by sub-editors. So actually, and in the olden days, of course, people phoned their copy in. The glory days of British journalism, you'd have reporters who would sit in the pub all day drinking with contacts, often so drunk they couldn't stand by the end of the day. And that's actually true. And they would phone their copy in. They would phone up the person, I've got this story. They'd read it out, and the copy editor would take it down. It would go to a sub editor, and it would get put on the page. They were out there doing the important job of getting stories, which is something that your average kind of bean counter might find it hard to justify, but will make absolute sense to any reporters or editors. And anything that the journalism era, I guess you would call it. It ended that. I remember being at one newspaper and they said, "Look, we're not concerned with the quality of writing." This was the managing editor. There's not concerned. We just want you to put out as much stuff as possible. And so the onus would be on the reporter to sit in their desk all day, write 7 or 8 stories, and you'd field requests. The SEO editor would be in touch. Can you rip this off from another publication? The picture editor would be in touch. Can you rip this off from a new publication? Audience editors, deputy editors, chief editors, all the rest of it. Rip this off, rip this off, rip this off. And actually, interesting enough, in the AI world, if an AI model does that, if it gorges itself too much on kind of fake data, it causes something called model collapse, which means it sort of collapses to its knees and stops working. And actually, I think the journalist media is experiencing something of that model collapse. And anything that can use technologies to get reporters out of the desk, away from the clutches of the SEO editor and the audience development manager, and able to actually get out there, talk to real people, knock on doors, get stories, and do things, frankly, that journalists should be, which is to be disreputable out in public and get the stories, no matter what. I think is to be welcomed. I didn't really realize that was from Belgium. I don't actually know anything about the Belgian news environment, but I think that's really a great thing. Although I do think writing is important, getting the stories is the most important thing and I think, yeah, I kind of cautiously welcomed that actually. So I thought that was encouraging, although I really don't think AI can write news stories very well. So I guess we'll see how that pans out.
I do think to some extent, leaders, CEOs, people who are in charge of these agencies are going to have to be savvy about exactly what kind of product they want to put out and exactly what kind of people they want to hire. You'll find different mindsets from agency to agency. Some people really want all of their staffers to be able to do everything, whether it's reporting or writing it down or, can you edit yourself? And every once in a while, you find a unicorn guy who can do every one of those things really well, but it really is only every once in a while. And so then lacking that guy, you've got to diversify. And so people are going to have to figure out, like, do I want to allow my journalist to go out and do what the journalist loves to do? And how much time do I want to make him bang his head against a keyboard to write everything perfectly? Or should I hire another guy who really loves the keyboard work? One of the things that I have loved the most in my career is checking the really, really fine points of grammar line by line. Most people can't stand that. So, it's a selling point if you have the kind of person who wants to hire you to do that sort of work. The question is, how much are people going to value that when the robot claims it can do it just as well? And I think we're going to have this sort of back and forth in the entire industry between I can get a robot to do that, so you're fired, and then a sort of buyer's remorse of actually the robot sucks at doing this, and I need somebody to come back and take care of it for real.
I want to bring up something Gloria David said. She's calling it the flip-flop phenomenon, when something that creates the exact opposite of what it was designed to create. Social media made people feel more isolated. Dating apps made finding a quality partner harder, not easier. Um,
Hmm.
Anecdote on that, I met my wife online. We got engaged 5.5 months later. 5 kids, 9 years, 10 year, almost 10 years. So I want my one anecdote proves her wrong. Despite all the data. At least that's what my AI system will tell me. The question Carrie asked, have you ever caught AI lying about your clients and had to fact check it? I don't think we've ever seen that. What we have seen is it making assumptions. So we'll put it in, we'll try to, put the prompts in, and it will say things that make sense in a broad way, but then we have to go in and really fine tune it, which is why we do such I laid out some of the details in my post today, but a lot of what we do is so heavily interview based. We don't these everyday people that were getting published at state outlets, political outlets, national dailies are not people we just called because they fit the format. Where we're just, our author finding process is very sophisticated. We look on Facebook to see if we have people who live in those states or in those industries, and then we call them. We call that a comfort call because someone is typically, these average people are not usually media savvy. They've never done this process before. So by engaging them makes a lot of the article come together because as Jasper said, that AI can put together the broad scopes, but then we got to create the intro because there's a lot of passive language with AI. We put that personal story in. So it's not so much fact checking, I don't think. I think it's more personalizing, tailoring, and customizing to the author, to a lot of times our client, who are usually often different people, the op-ed editor, who has a number of challenges and audience questions, and then the end consumer. We're trying to hit four audiences in this piece, and AI just can't do that, especially when you have author and client narrative and voices that may be in some level of conflict.
There is also, I think it's worth mentioning, the AI can provide sources for things or the AI can fact check
Mm.
things, but there's you're really rolling the dice if you allow that to be the final stop on your product. Because as Dustin said, the AI, one of my pet peeves, if you'll permit a brief digression, is that as this technology advances, everybody is using anthropomorphic language for it. And we're talking about what the AI understands and what the AI writes and how the AI thinks. And it's not really doing any of those things. And the more comfortable we get with using that kind of language, the easier it is, I think, to make a self-fulfilling prophecy out of everybody's going to get fired because the robot is just as human as you are. Look at all the things it's doing. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't written the style guide yet on how to refer to the robot in the most derogatory terms possible, but maybe in a future episode we can talk about that. But all that is to say, I think AI at its worst is just going to be another cook that comes into the kitchen. You have to have somebody making sure that what it puts out for you makes any sense. Because Dustin, as you said, it's absolutely correct. The AI can kind of know the right vocabulary to make a
Right.
point, But then you have a human editor look at it and say, this makes no sense in this industry. It makes no sense in this niche. This person would never have put it this way.
Can I jump in real quick, Drew, just to put a
Yep.
fine point on what you're saying? When we first started working together, right? You and I have known each other for 13 years. We didn't start working together till 3 years ago, just under 3 years ago. And we brought you in as the mercenary op-ed editor. And I like the term mercenary because it's funny, but also because you were the eyes on a piece and you literally knew nothing about our clients. And we wanted that set of eyes. But at least 20% of the time, especially early on, before you begin to work with multiple pieces from a single client, you would say this doesn't make any sense, and we would have to tell you as the client managers would have to jump in and say, well, actually that does make sense. You just don't know that niche. And I think we have the same problem with AI, except that because people are using it so much more widely and they're trusting it more, I think that human, that the niche expert, the client manager, whatever role is being played by the human, is missing oftentimes because we overtrust. So I just wanted to point out that that's a human problem as well. But I think with humans, we're willing to check it more. So I'm sorry for interrupting, Drew.
No, no, that's fine. It actually feeds into something else I wanted to mention. That there's I would go so far as to call it a moral component in all of these deliberations we're having about this emerging technology, which is, and I mentioned this in brief a little bit in the CEO magazine piece that I published last year. We're not going to want a culture 2 generations from now where everything is done by a robot. So even if we have this technology and can use it, I think people who really care about what they're doing, who love their work, will want to train more human beings to carry on that legacy of the work that they're doing. And I can't really emphasize this point enough that even if you can get a robot to do all the stuff that all of your staffers might once have done, if you've got a whole company full of robots, like what have you got? I can come up with all kinds of very dramatic looking images of a man sitting on a throne with a whole bunch of car parts all around him. What has he ended up with at that point?
Mhm. AI still, of course, has a famous propensity to hallucinate, which means you can't always necessarily trust its aspect. And some of these have been hilarious. It's advised people to go and eat rocks for minerals, because it understands that you need to eat minerals, and we do need to eat minerals. So why not go out and put a rock on your pizza? It's invented all sorts of defamatory claims, of some really nasty crimes. It's made some false claims, and I think this kind of we're probably walking into a world where we trust the output of these models. And hallucinations are kind of a feature rather than necessarily a bug, because part of it generating original content, it's going to make the odd mistake in it. So I think, as long as we don't trust it too much, we should be fine. I've not really seen any egregious hallucinations in my time, but it's just important to understand how they work. So there was a great story actually not so long ago. It was where a supermarket brand, I think in Australia, had installed an AI model to suggest recipes. So you load in, you say, look, I've got these leftovers. What can you make? And people were saying, I've got rat poison and methanol left over. What can you make? He goes, well, if you just sprinkle a bit of that rat poison on your pizza, it's going to be absolutely fantastic. A bit of methanol flavored chips and stuff like that. So it's kind of got the sort of gist of the task, but it didn't get the spirit of it, if you see what I mean. And I always love a good AI hallucination because they're funny, but I think in a mission critical environment, that's incredibly dangerous. If it spouts, we've already seen Elon Musk's Grok declare itself to be Mecha Hitler, and start spouting some really nasty stuff. And then, so Elon describing that, Elon Musk says he has to strike a balance between sort of super woke on one side and Mecha Hitler on the other. And actually, it's very difficult to stop the AI model going to extremes for whatever reason, which I thought was kind of fascinating. So I think we're going to see issues like that more often.
I want to close on something here that praising AI in a way as a PR practitioner. I'm not an expert on what I'm about to say, but I've heard enough smart people say it that I think it's true, so I'm going to borrow their words. That with the LLMs increasingly showing a lot of respect to PR, there is this idea that PR can become more valuable and respected than ever within the business community and within the clients that we have and the organizations for which we work. And assuming that continues to carry forward and the greater percentage of LLMs are respecting what's considered the high quality URLs and digital locations, news outlets, etc. That does mean that perhaps AI will go from being, excuse me, AI, PR will go from being the nice to have, which is, marketing is always the first place that's cut. And we're on the other end of that communications funnel to where like the nicest one to have rather than being seen as mission critical. I do wonder with AI and the LLMs, could that benefit the PR industry? I'm not really that concerned with the industry shrinking because I understand that no one's crying over the horseshoe maker today. We just drive cars. So I'm not as concerned about the AI, the PR industry shrinking or growing. But I do wonder, and Jasper, I think you'd be the most qualified person to respond to this, is do you think that AI will benefit the PR industry on the LLM side, even if it hurts, some on the content creation side?
I have actually seen predictions that suggest that the PR industry is predicted to grow, not shrink massively. Whether or not it employs as many people in the industry as it grows, I guess is the question. I get hundreds of press releases every day of my life and have done for, I was going to say centuries, I'm not that old, decades. Um, and what is often lacking is originality. Certainly is so that stuff's all going to get washed out. But for a really skilled PR practitioner, ideally, I'd say, a journalist who's in the game, not meaning to be too self-promotional, that really knows how to tell a story, how to make something attention grabbing to stand out in an inbox, to rise above the AI slop and be visible. One of the corrections, Drew, I have to say this, Drew made a great correction to one of my articles about AI slop. I think I called it a cacophony of AI slop. But of course, if AI slop was to make a sound, it would be more of a squelch. And actually, so I had to we changed it to tsunami, which I just thought was brilliant. I've been telling everyone that's Drew. I had to mention that the sound of AI slop. We'll be able to stand above that. I think we'll be in a good position. So I think we could grow, and if it's about making brands trusted and about making their message the most interesting it can be to reach a specific audience or a large audience, I actually think it'd be good for us, and I think it can. I think the traditional kind of hierarchy of PR may struggle. The idea that you have an account executive who's basically got a lot of manual work to do. They have to man the databases, send the emails, make the coffee, put up with the abuse. Not in art, obviously not at Proven Media. I joke.
We don't have account executives. We have a different business model entirely, so I didn't take offense at
Oh, right, no, good, good.
it.
I think that kind of rung will go, but certainly I'm not sure I would have survived working in that rung, to be honest. I'm not sure many I think actually possibly it kind of excludes a lot of creative people. I've met a lot of very frustrated account executives who are like, this is not what I signed up for. I signed up to tell stories in the most interesting possible way. And actually the core function of PR, I actually think we've got quite a bright future ahead. I hope so. I could be wrong, but I'm reasonably optimistic.
Andrew, I'd like to close with sort of you on talking about the copy editing side. Jasper has written a couple of pieces about pitching, the tabloid journalism and how that helps things stand out. And he mentioned it in his opening comments here on the show. But I'd like for you to jump in and talk about fine-tuning that too. Because it doesn't matter if you have a great pitch, you have to have that very fine-tuned content because you will have those errors and those who have that elevated copy will stand out more.
That's absolutely true. There's only one first impression, right? It's easy enough to say that. And first impression can be wrecked from many different angles, not to be too negative, but obviously there is the part where you write compelling copy that everybody wants to read, and Jasper excels at that. But then you might put the wrong punctuation mark in a prominent place in that very compelling copy. And the editor who is considering your article will see that and think, I mean, he might think, look, I can't believe this guy who's so good at writing spelled this one thing wrong. Clearly, I should talk to him more. But he also might think, I've got a bunch of good guys who are spelling things right. So you have to be careful with stuff like that. So
Mhm.
yeah, a human eye that has experience in this and intuition in it too, which the robot will never have, is required in order to get top tier content through to the people who care the most about it.
Well, we're gonna wrap up here. This was a lot of fun. We've been using the term AI slop in the broader world, but I was glad we were able to bring in Jasper's favorite term, the Slopocalypse. Did I say that right,
You
Jasper?
did. You got
Oh,
there in the end.
fantastic. And then a good work. But again, I want to put a plug in for Proven Media Solutions because we work really hard internally. A lot of our work is op-eds. We do sort of traditional, interviews and everything else too. But as we're working in the public affairs space, especially, there's so many opinion pieces out there. You can go to any website you want and find an opinion. But and of course, half the people will dismiss it and half the people will support it because that's how American politics works. What we often do is find people who literally have nothing besides a Facebook account for their personal life. And we're getting them into the biggest paper in their state. We're getting them into political outlets that are national, trades, state level, local. And it's because we're telling those stories. And so I think if you want to stand out in the era of AI slop, it's finding the most compelling details that are relevant to the audience and excelling in the content copy that's created based upon that human story. And then making sure that that final set of eyes, in this case, we have Drew acting as both a fact checker and a copy editor for I think every piece. Jasper and Drew run the content department these days, not me. But there's the fact checking, there's the copy editing, and that's what really I think helps us elevate that. Is not because we don't use AI or we think AI is bad, but we know that a human touch is important from the time we ideate with the client all the way to the pitch that goes out to the editor. So, folks, this was a lot of fun. Thank you, Carrie, Rod, and the others for asking questions. Next week, I think we're talking about, ironically, we're talking about how you don't necessarily need to be online to build a brand. That will be with Will and Renee. So please join us next week at Cracking the Comms Code. Folks, have a great rest of your day. Enjoy the warmer weather. Take care.
Thanks. Great to be here.